Now, let's talk about some of the other worries about sending your employees to make deliveries. You will need to consider payment and expense issues for your delivery drivers. Under the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, an employee must be paid at least minimum wage for all hours worked, be paid for all of their hours worked, and all the time that is worked must be counted when determining overtime hours worked. Accordingly, you need to make sure that they are being paid for their time even if they are just dropping off a case on their way home or picking up supplies on the way into work. Also, you need to consider the reimbursement of expenses. Under the Fair Labor Standards Act, employers are actually not required to reimburse employees for business expenses. However, business expenses may not reduce the employee's wages below the minimum wage. This requirement that the payment to an employee may not be reduced below minimum wage begs the question, how would you know if expenses reduce an employee's wages below minimum wage unless you require the employee to track their expenses? Moreover, you need to be aware that even though the federal law does not require the reimbursement of any particular expense, many state laws require a company to reimburse an employee for their expenses. For example, in sunny California, the employee is entitled to reimbursement by their employer for all expenses or losses incurred in the direct consequence of the discharge of the employee's work duties. If you're in a state that requires reimbursement of business expenses, or your own policy requires the reimbursement of business expenses, then when your employee is required to use their personal vehicle for work-related activities, you must reimburse the employee for expenses related to the use of that vehicle. Note, as previously instructed, this provision does not typically include the use of personal vehicle to commute between home and work, perhaps unless a required vehicle exception is met. Also note, if you are requiring the employee to bring their vehicle to work so they can make deliveries, you may owe them for the expense of transporting their vehicle to and from work, even if no delivery is involved during the commute to and from work. According to the IRS, beginning on January 1st, 2015, the standard mileage rates for the use of a car is 57.5 cents per mile for business miles driven, and that's up from 56 cents in 2014.